everyone. Welcome to the ARMA Info Next webinar series. We are so grateful that you're here and joining us today. Putting AI to work, practical ways to use AI in records management and information governance is today's session, and Paula Smith is here as an expert to give you all the knowledge and information on this exciting topic. Announcements. Before we get to it, I'm going to give you guys a couple ARMA InfoCon, very near and dear to my heart. P.S. I'm Jennifer Millett, Vice President of Event Strategy and Partnerships here at ARMA International. So, like I said, this event is very near and dear to my heart, and we're excited to have host everyone in Houston. RecordPoint will be joining us as a featured sponsor. So we hope that if you haven't yet registered, go to arma.org and you can get all the information you need today to register. But we've got everything from 66 different sessions you can take. Great keynotes, awesome networking opportunities, and then, of course, the fun and exciting expo floor. So we hope to see everyone in Houston. And then a quick sale we have going on this month for IG month. Anyone interested in any IG resources, getting their Essentials of IG certificate, any of those things are 25% off in our bookstore right now. So just go to arma.org, use the code IG25 off, and you can get 25% off anything IG related in our bookstore. And I just want to take this time to, thank RecordPoint for being a great sponsor and always supporting ARMA and everything that we do. We hope that when you're considering products and services for your organization, you think and support the organizations that support you. Before we move on and I pass it over to Paula, I'm going to give you a few housekeeping items. You will have access to the slides and the recording post-event. Just keep an eye on your inbox. That should be coming, sometime in the next 48 hours. If you've got any questions for myself or Paula, just pop them into the Q&A chat and we'll do our best to get to those today. And I think with that, Paula, the show is yours.
Thank you so much. So as Jennifer said, my name's Paula Smith. I'm a principal consultant here at RecordPoint, and I've been with RecordPoint nearly 4 years now, but have been a partner of theirs or a customer for a long, long time. Now, this is not going to be a sales pitch. I'm wearing my records manager hat. So as well as my day job here, I am heavily involved in our version of ARMA, which is RIMPA. So this is very much my fun space, and I really am very honored to be with you guys this morning. Now, as Jennifer said, you are going to get a copy of these slides. We also have a couple of things that we're going to get you guys to do today. So if you've got your phones handy or a web browser handy, I'm going to get you involved in this. So it's not just my voice talking to you. The slides will be updated, and I'll explain what's going on right about now. So I have a question for all of you before we start. So if you have your phones handy, do you want to just scan that QR code for me? What that's going to do is take you to a little web app that we have called Slido, and I've got a question for you. And the first question I'm going to ask you is, have you made use of AI tools in your work life already? So you've got a couple of multiple choice options there. So if you guys want to scan that. Oh, so far we've got a couple of one person in. So I've got the results on another screen here, and when we send the slide deck out to you, I'll update this with the data that we've just had for you. So you'll have some real life data to take back to your organizations. So far we're looking at around about half of you, looking at my little screen here, that have actually made use of AI tools, which is brilliant. Quite a few of you considering it. The beauty of this tool is that I could see all the bars moving, which is great fun. So we'll give it a couple of seconds. And I think the reason why I always ask this is we did a similar session for some people a little while ago, and it was quite a fascinating conversation about how many people thought they weren't sure, or had used AI tools without even necessarily realizing what they were using. And then we had a lot of people who, for whatever reason, organizations had put a pause on any use of AI tools within the organization, partly from security reasons, which is one of the common conversations we have, which again, I'll go through later on. So I'm going to leave that open for a little bit so that you guys can continue to answer. One of the challenges that we have with our world as records managers, and I say that as a chartered and practicing records manager myself also, and we've talked about this, it seems like every year I say the same thing, but data is absolutely growing at an exponential rate. So we have new tools, new ways of working. Post-COVID, we had to look at new tools a lot faster because people could not be in the office with us. We couldn't actually get together and use some of our traditional tools. So the content that we're creating, the types of content that we're creating, the platforms that are available to us, there's just more and more data than ever before. And if you think about kind of the way that we've worked traditionally, that's just not possible anymore. We cannot do our work the way we've done it with the amount of data now that's coming through, and again, the variety. So we always talk about kind of this volume and velocity. Every year it seems that that is increasing at a ridiculous rate, and often we're trying to play catch up. Often things get dropped in our laps with a, hey, we've implemented this system, we've got all this stuff, can you help? Well, it would be nice to have been part of that conversation at the beginning, but of course we can, because that's what we do. We're also suffering a lot with data breaches, and we did a webinar a little while ago on a situation that happened in Australia. So if you haven't seen that one, pop over to the website and have a look. Personal data in particular is being compromised and stolen. So as many of you will know from a lot of the cases that you've had in the US, but also globally, your personal data has a value, and a lot of value, to bad actors. They can get their hands on it when we don't do our jobs well. And it used to be really scary and, oh, wow, that's so new. Oh, what is that? Now it's almost becoming normal that there's a data breach, what sometimes feels like every week. And again, we have, as records managers, a duty to make sure that the records that we're looking after, and a lot of that does hold personal data, are looked after properly, that we have some of that security protocols. Not that that's just our job, but it's definitely something that we work in partnership with our colleagues on. So when you're looking at AI tools, there are lots of concerns. There's a lot of opportunity, which we're going to go through today, but you cannot get around some of those data breaches either. So bringing all of that together and being aware of that, and using some of those AI tools even to identify what personal data you've got, to make our lives easier so we can put the right controls on it. Because there is a cost to losing trust. And we talk about this all the time in our community about what our role is and what value we bring to organizations. And I said many, many years ago to a CEO of mine, it's my job to help keep you out of jail. Because when you do stupid things, the records are there to prove that you've done stupid things. So ideally, you don't do stupid things. But sometimes things happen, sometimes decisions are made. We cannot afford to lose trust with our internal stakeholders and customers, but also our external stakeholders and customers either. So 75% of customers that have been surveyed will not use services or buy products from organizations who they don't trust with their data. So as we get those data breaches coming through all the time, we as consumers hold that power to say, do you know what? I don't want to engage with you. If you can't look after the basics of my data with all of that, equipment and systems that you have, I don't trust you to do right by me with this product or this service. 50% of organizations will also stop, 50% of respondents will also stop using an organization's services once they've had a data breach. So again, the power is in the hand of the consumer. We are staff, so often we don't get a choice about what systems to use, but business to business services are also affected by this. So if you think about things like the data breaches that have happened recently, we have had healthcare providers, particularly in the US, who've had those data breaches. It affects everybody around them. So it's not just that company, it's everybody then that are connected to them to deliver those other services. So again, we just need to be conscious of some of the challenges that we have and what that's going to mean from a records management perspective, in terms of when these new tools come through, how we use them to get the benefit, but also making sure that we're not putting our data at risk at the same time. So thinking about your daily life, and I know that you guys have all answered that first question, so thank you for that. So just a quick update. There have been about 42% of you who've said that you're already using AI in your daily life, which is great. So where will it fit for you? So AI tools can be used in a whole heap of different ways when it comes to our life. So you can use them in the configuration systems. You can use them to classify records, and that's probably one of the big ones for us as a community. When I started in the industry, a long time ago now. People talked about knowledge management. They talked about having all of these tools to help us, and they weren't great. We didn't have the compute power. The minute we went into cloud, we then had the ability to classify records at scale, to look at large data sets. And with the tools and technology there, AI, again, had what it needed to actually thrive. Dispose of records, another area. So again, using some of those AI tools to help with the decision making. So importantly, help us reduce risk. So are we making the right decisions here? Are there other areas that we need to consider? Does this record set have personal data, for example? The management of physical records, looking at your file plans, your information architecture generally. Also thinking about the governance, your decision making in particular, how we can extract some of that data from the data sets themselves and from our record series to help better decision making, more ethical decision making. Using AI tools in your training. So again, we're going to come on to some of these examples in a second. Looking at security and risk. So again, using some of those AI tools to identify those risk areas, to implement security elements so that we can, again, just make better decisions and make our lives easier, but not putting on those data sets at risk. And doing some of that real life reporting. So again, our stakeholders, particularly those at an executive level that sometimes we can struggle to engage with, to make sure that they've got their information at a time that they need it, but also in a format that's relevant for them. So generative AI can be helpful for a variety of tasks, but you do have to be cautious because it can be wrong. So if you think about things like, again, I'm going to use ChatGPT here. You can do things like text writing, and this is where I find it really helpful. I can get a bit flowery with my language because I love words. So sometimes I'll have really long sentences, and sometimes it's easier to say, okay, can you refine this? So I may put a piece of text in, an extract from a policy document, for example, and ask the OpenAI tools to come in and refine that for me, tighten up my language. Now, you have to be conscious here that sometimes if you are using this a lot, it can also affect the tone and language of what you're writing, and that can go against your corporate style guide. So it can make it very formal. And if your style is to be more personal in your language, so us together as opposed to more formal language, then again, you might not be getting the outcome that you're after. But it can help, again, a couple of sentences here, an extract, doing your bios for sessions like this, put some text into one of the generative AI tools and let it help you. You can also use it to find information. So we used to do this a lot when we had physical records. We had to look at storage areas and give a lot of detail to finance people and also the health and safety and the risk guys about how many physical records we had. So how many physical records can I fit into a standard shipping container? What are the greatest risks to physical records in my area? So again, if you live in Tornado Alley, then you would expect that that's going to pop up and say, okay, don't put your records in an attic because that building could get blown away. Likewise, for me in New Zealand, one of our biggest concerns with anything physical is earthquakes. And we literally did have a whole section of our physical record series in another organization I work for where we couldn't access them post-earthquake because we couldn't get in the building. So finding information can be really helpful. How many, what is the legislation that drives this particular function that I have, etc. But you can also use it to do things like building your file plans and your business classification scheme. So if you go into ChatGPT and put that text in and say, create a business classification scheme for state government or for the health sector or for the finance and insurance sector, it will build you a skeleton business classification scheme. Now, that used to take us months of work to do. Now it can be done in about a minute and a half. So that is a massive time saving. I always use these as a skeleton. I will never take it as, there you go, there's our business classification scheme, because sometimes it gets it wrong. Okay, and I'll explain what some of those considerations are later. But it can be really useful to do that. Likewise, it can be really helpful for your records retention schedules. So when we're trying to put together those schedules, One of the challenges that we often have is convincing people, why this is needed. So why we can't just use 7 years for everything, where that 7-year thing even came from. So I will put in questions, for example, that says, okay, what legislation applies to healthcare records in the state of California? What legislation applies to finance records in the state of Texas? What regulations apply to the creation and caption of audit records in the state of Tennessee? So you can make this really broad and say, leave out the geography, and then you can refine that question and say, okay, you've given me the legislation that applies to healthcare records generally by what information you have. I now want you to refine that to a particular state, to a particular country even, and you may be in a situation where you work for, let's say, BHP, where you have a multi-jurisdictional environment. So you might have to look at this from not only the USA, but Europe as well. You can also use it to create diagrams, and I really like this. So using diagrams, infographics, and videos. So, you can go into things like Adobe, and I've just put a couple in here as examples. So you could go into Adobe AI and try and create useful diagrams for your training programs. So records management for most people, not us obviously, is not the sexiest topic in the world, and we're always looking for ways to improve that. So looking for those kind of ways of making really high quality diagrams and infographics that help us talk to people about what it is that we do, that talk to people about what their roles are and what those components are. Now, you're lucky with ARMA, you do have also a lot of resources in your environment where you can pull from some of those, but maybe you can use those and again and improve on them and share that with the community. I can use Copilot to create an infographic for disposal processing. I can use things like Sora VGPA to create a video of a room that's full of unorganized papers and boxes. If I'm looking at a digitization program and I'm trying to get people to really understand, I can create a video and not just of the room, but of the hazards in there. So I will often look for any lever I can find, and often health and safety is one of my best friends to say, look, this is what this looks like. If we don't do this properly, we have trip and fall hazards. We have potential loss of data when there's a fire or a flood or the sprinklers go off, etc., etc. So they can be really helpful. The problem that you have with everything that's in here, with the exception probably Copilot and Adobe, a lot of these are kind of open models, so they'll bring back to you what they've been fed, and you do need to be aware of that as you're kind of using these tools. There are some organizations who will require you to watermark if you have used any of the generative AI tools to create content, so that people are aware of what tools have been used and that they may need to proceed with a little bit of caution, because you can put a question into these tools. So for example, I can put a question in that says, here's a situation that's going on, what are the privacy implications, can I issue this information or not? And you sometimes will get the wrong answer because what it's been fed and what it's reading from is also incorrect. And we've talked about this a lot over the years: rubbish in, rubbish out. Now, there's a lot of really good stuff in here, but again, I just be aware sometimes it can be wrong. So when I'm doing work here and I'm looking at creating things using these AI tools, I will always, always use them as a skeleton. I will never use them as that is the absolute correct answer. You have to go back. And there's a little saying my grandfather used to give me: you can trust it, Paula, but you need to verify. So that's something that's always in my mind when I'm using these tools. You can also, though, use your own data. So there's something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, where you can basically use your stuff. So again, it uses an existing large language model, connects to your data sources. So it means that you can make maximum use of what you've got in-house and basically leverage all of that. So you have more control then of the data that it's pulling from. Now, again, it does require some good quality data. So if you're connecting to a data source that maybe is a test environment, not a good start because there'll be some dummy and incorrect data in there. But it's information that you have complete control over. So again, you get more trust. So you're looking here at things like Copilot, where you can say, give me the top 10 documents that are related to information management in my SharePoint site. Give me the highest accessed policy documents across our internet site. Pull from all of that so that you can basically trust your own data usually a lot better than you can trust someone else's, because you know the control mechanisms around its creation and capture. But again, you can leverage the tools to bring to you, to surface to you, information that's relevant. You can refine your questions once that retrieval has occurred. So for example, if I say, what are the top 10 documents about information management in my SharePoint site? Once those have been provided to me, I can then ask the system to summarize them. So summarize them and give me an executive summary, no longer the 1 page in length, because I want to give that to an executive. You can do this with things like meeting minutes as well. So bring me the meeting minutes from my project and give me a status summary. So things like how we create project reports may change in the future as we use more of these AI tools. So instead of the project manager typing out manually what's going on, where we're up to, you can use some of those tools to be able to say, okay, give me the minutes and the notes that have been taken with things like Otter. So Otter is a tool that will automatically transcribe for you your meeting. And you can use that to say, okay, now give me a summary. So you can actually get the AI tools to give you your project report instead of having you manually type it. Again, time saver. Sometimes it struggles a little bit with my accent. I am originally from Wales, not that you'll probably get it from this accent, but sometimes if I get a little bit too excited, that Welshness comes through. So we've had some fun with the Otter tools. Alrighty, final question for you guys, and I know some of you have already been in here, well done. So the second question, so again, same thing, take a photograph of that QR code. The next question I've got for you is, what is stopping you from making use of AI tools in your daily tasks? So this is basically going to be a word cloud. So I just want you guys to put in whatever you're thinking at the moment. So put your terms in here. We'll get a word cloud together and we'll go through and then have a look at it. What that will mean for you is that you'll be able then to pick out some of those themes for your organization, but also from your community. And it might be something that you want to then go back to ARMA with in terms of, hey, can we have a look at, so right now, security. I'm not surprised that one's one of the big ones. Lack of AI policy, very nice. Policy is a really interesting one, and ethics also. There are an awful lot of conversations at the moment about ethical standards. So the government here in New Zealand has put together a draft ethical standard framework for the use of AI tools. Other organizations and other regulators are doing the same. And again, a lot of that is about recognizing that we are going to be using these, but how far do you let the AI tool make decisions, particularly when some of those decisions may be related to people's health, liberty, etc. So there does need, again, to be a little bit of care here. Excellent. Yeah, so policy is another one that is coming through. Privacy breaches, yep, yes, privacy breaches is again a huge one, and part of that is knowing what the tools are and what information you're feeding them, what those boundaries are. Yeah, we used to go through in the old days a large process of testing, and we do security penetration testing of tools, and we would have a whole projects, and little users like us would not get anywhere near it until our beautiful IT colleagues had said, okay, we're happy that it's a secure architecture, nothing can get in and nothing can get out that we don't want it to. With cloud, a lot of that changed. So the fact that anybody can sign up to any tool with a credit card means that generally our IT colleagues have a harder time lately of just trying to put some of that together. So it can be a little bit difficult at times to just pull all of that information together in a secure environment. So we can sign up to things, and I don't know about you guys, but I am not always the best at reading the terms and conditions of every app I install on my phone. Shouldn't admit to that, but I will. Think about that from a corporate point of view, and it gets even worse. So again, I'm going to leave that question open so you guys can continue to put your feelings into there. So right now, your big ones: lack of knowledge, information security, policy on the IT side, but also the AI side, and trust. So really good, guys, really good. So what are some of the considerations and the risks here that we have? So there are a number of questions to ask before you begin looking at these AI tools. And one of them is, are you using an open or closed model? If you cannot answer that question, you should not be using the tool. And the reason for that is things like ChatGPT are what we call open models. It's basically an open kimono to the whole of the internet. So you are feeding information in, and everybody else that has access to things like ChatGPT also has access to that. Okay. So not only are you putting a lot of information out there, that tool is consuming it, but that tool is also a learning model. So those large language models allow the system to create connections. So you may think that you're feeding it something pretty innocuous, but your next question and the next question that comes after that builds on that. And the AI tool will see patterns. There'll be patterns that we're not even aware of. And within the privacy space, this is where we have to get a little bit careful. So I have had colleagues in other organizations who've emailed me to say, hey, I've just put this into ChatGPT and I don't think I should have done. It's like, well, it's too late now. You've sent it out into the big worldwide web. So when you're putting things like not necessarily personal data, but you're putting a scenario out there. So yeah, you might have a question that someone's coming to you. So let's say you're a line manager and you're putting a question out there. How do I deal with this? So here's my scenario. I think I'm going to fire this person. That information's gone out there. If you're using things like ChatGPT, what that's also done is as you've asked that question, if you're logged in, it also has your login details. It has your browser details. It has your location data. There's an awful lot of behind the scenes stuff that those models capture about you without you even recognizing it. You say yes to it when you actually sign up for those services. But again, if we're not reading the terms and conditions all the time, you are basically providing potentially more information than you need to. And there are obviously opportunities to not sign in, so it doesn't collect that information. But then what you've got access to, the number of questions you can ask, for example, a little bit less. So you do need to be aware of whether you're using those open or closed models, and also what that means from your security posture and whether you're actually inadvertently breaching your own security policy. So lots of organizations are really strict about who can access your content, what you can do with removable USB devices that used to be all the rage, how you access them remotely. But sometimes what we're finding is in a desire to do things faster, because let's be honest, every year it feels like we've got more work to do rather than less, and usually on a smaller budget. We need to get using these models, but just be a little bit aware of which model you're using and why. The closed models are the ones that are existing within your own organization. So if you look at a lot of, and again, looking at this from a records perspective, a lot of the automated tools that do classification disposal work, those are a closed model. They exist inside your environment and they don't look outside. So for those of you who are RecordPoint customers, hopefully you're aware of this. So we have a machine learning tool that helps automatically classify your records. There are many other vendors that have this as well, but they are closed models. They are installed, for want of a better phrase, in your environment, and they only exist there. So we don't get to see it. We can't use that and say, oh, you're like this person, we're going to share your model. It doesn't work that way. It's completely closed to you. Copilot, the same. So Copilot, again, is in your tenancy. It is closed within the bounds of that tenancy to allow you to, again, put some controls around it. So the ones that are internal, now the closed models tend to be, they're great, but they are using only your data. So they are skewed to you immediately, and you also then don't have the benefits of the gazillion bytes of content that's out there in the world. But for some of you, that might be a better option. Okay, so use those large language models internally with your own data, get the best out of them, and maybe dip out to an open model with, again, some innocuous questions if you need them. When you are looking at that model though, so even if it's a closed model in your environment, is the information that you're using here, does it include kind of redundant information, obsolete information? trivial information that really we don't even need. Because again, in terms of the decisions that we're making, and this is where AI tools really can help, in surfacing information to you, you want it to be surfacing current information, correct information, and information that's based on kind of new thinking rather than going back to models that were old, that may be flawed, or that may just have data that again is just doesn't help you. The more that you've got a lot of that kind of content in your systems, these large language models and these AI tools are going to pull from that. So the cleaner your data corpus is, the better quality results you're going to get from any use of these tools. So again, get rid of everything when you can, not just from a legal perspective, because again, we don't want to be holding things when we don't need to. But again, we do want to make sure that the decision making is valid. I mentioned this before, what information is being captured by those generative AI tools? So again, when you look at those AI tools, what information is being captured? Now, if you're using documentary AI tools, that's one thing. But you can also be using those AI tools to create videos or to extract scenes from videos, okay? So if we go back to our training environment, we will often use sample documents in our training environment as a means of teaching people about audit, teaching people about risk, teaching people about how to classify. So we'll have these kind of sample documents that we've pulled. But you can also do that same thing with video clips. So I used to run a records management 101 workshop, and as part of that, I got my teams to play charades. So I would get them to play charades with movies that had records and information management topics in them. They were fun to do, but instead of doing that, and again, thinking about how we now work, I could actually go and extract those scenes from those videos. So one of my favorites, I'm a big Marvel fan, by the way, big sci-fi geek. One of my favorites is there's a scene in the Hulk where while he's Bruce Banner, he eats a USB key that's got all of his data on it. He becomes the Hulk. He goes back to being Bruce Banner, and then the USB key appears again after a bathroom break, and all the data is completely intact. The USB key is absolutely fine. And I find that an absolutely hilarious, ridiculous example, but it's one of those examples that you could pull from a video. If you're using your own data sets, you could be pulling from, let's say, again, if we go back to our messy physical record space, you could be pulling an example of security feeds and potentially picking up things that you shouldn't be picking up, or potentially breaching a security protocol, having somebody's face or person in there, again, which we don't want to necessarily see. So you do need to be a little bit careful about what that information is that's being captured, what you're extracting, and making sure that the policy architecture around you, and you've already pulled this out in that last word cloud that we just did together about that policy. So what are some of those controls? My next consideration, and the question I always ask, is would I be comfortable with that information being available to the public? If the answer to that is no, do not put it into something like ChatGPT. If the answer is yes, and if somebody said to me, if I use freedom of information legislation or access to information legislation, would I have to provide that? If the answer is yes, then obviously your security posture and the risk is a lot lower. But you do need to be conscious, again, when you're looking at those models that are outside of your control, what does that look like in terms of being on the front page of the Atlantic, being on the front page of your newspaper, or being on the Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, wherever it is. We don't want to be opening the kimono to some of those things. Now, again, just be conscious here that what can seem innocuous can sometimes not be. So you do need to be conscious of, if you're using those tools, again, to refine documents and to refine statements, just be a little bit careful about how you're phrasing things, and also what your next question is. Because when you're logged into the system, the learning will happen. Well, you ask this, then you ask me to refine it here, then you ask me to refine it here. And again, massive compute power. So the tools will find patterns, which can be really helpful because the next time you ask a similar question, or let's say Jennifer asks a question that I put into ChatGPT yesterday, it's going to recognize that and say, oh, hang on, you asked this, but the last 5 people that have asked this have then asked this. So I'm going to give you this information. So it will try and be helpful. And sometimes it's great. Again, I use these tools and I do like these tools, but you just need to be a bit careful. Above all else, you must focus on your customer's privacy. Now, that could be an internal customer as much as an external customer. So, things like those of you who are involved in some of the privacy related work. So, if someone's coming to you to say, hey, I've got a privacy issue, you're not necessarily going to put that entire question into ChatGPT, but you might put elements in there to get a steer of which of the privacy principles you need to be aware of. Is there actual legislation in your state? Do you have any, for example, other legislation that's going to impact you? So again, the GDPR from Europe can affect people and organizations outside Europe if you've got personal data about European citizens. So sometimes it's not as clear cut as we need. So you do need to be conscious of your customers' privacy, but also your own. Okay, so just be conscious of what you're giving out when you're going out to these open models in particular. Closed models, less so. But just remember that those closed models will also build up a picture about what you're doing. And if you think about when you're logging into your Microsoft 365 environment every morning, it will surface things to you. So here's what your team is working. You worked on a document for 4.2 hours yesterday. So it's a little bit creepy sometimes when you walk into the system and you see some of that stuff. But again, it is one of those things that can be helpful because I don't know about you, but sometimes I leave the office and I think, okay, what was I working on yesterday? Because I know I need to finish it. So sometimes it's helpful to have that surface to you. Treat the information that's being generated as a starting point, not a definitive answer. So even with your closed models that are looking at your own data set, when you're asking questions and when you're asking it for help and asking it to do tasks, do treat it as a starting point. So when you're looking at tools that do automatic records classification, for example, there is a period where you want to train it, you want to curate it, you want to make sure it's getting it right. So I will, again, treat what the system is giving me, even with our own product, because again, I do the records manager role for some of my clients. And when the suggestions come to me, I will check them, I will curate them, because when it's learning, sometimes like a child, it does it wrong. Okay, so I've asked it to do a task, it has got it slightly wrong, and I need to correct it. If you are just willy-nilly saying, well, it's a computer, it will obviously get it right, you're going to end up with really poor outcomes. So for a period, you want to say, let me just check that you're getting it right. That's absolutely fine. You're good to go on that one. Ooh, let's just have a look over here because you're not quite hitting the mark. Because ultimately, when you're using some of these tools, there are other outcomes that we want to have. So when we're classifying records, we need to make sure that that classification is correct. So we're getting not only the right value assessment for that record series, we are also then getting the right retention actions and disposal actions for it. We know how long we're going to keep it. We also know whether it's something vital to the organization. We know whether it's something that we're going to eventually have to transfer to an archival authority. We've got all of that great information. But if we get that classification wrong, incorrect outcomes are going to be had and incorrect decisions are going to be made. So when you start with these AI tools, use them as a starting point, accept that they are learning tools and there will be a little bit of training involved. And once you get to that point where they're really reliable, awesome, we can relax a little bit. But the AI tools again will give you what they've been fed. So if you fed them poor data, you're going to get a poor outcome. So there is a responsibility on us to use these well. And like I said earlier, we'll ask it questions around our business classification scheme creation. We'll ask it questions about the legislative imperatives that we have for a particular area of work. I will not use that as the Bible. I will literally use that as, okay, that's my starting point. I'm going to go use this and check. Now, those of you who've ever done workshops before, which is probably everybody on this call, you will all know that the worst thing you can do is go into a workshop with a blank whiteboard and ask people, so what do you need? What is the answer? Because immediately our brains just go completely blank. So one of the things that's actually really useful with these tools is to give you that straw man, is to say, okay, I've got this, let's pull it apart together and make it better. So it can really be used also as a really good engagement tool for us to be able to use that starting point to really engage your customers, to have a really good conversation with them. So I might ask ChatGPT, and I have a lot, what some of the health and safety legislation is there, because I'm trying to look for other hooks where I can talk to my business. So instead of talking to them about records management, I talk to them about what's going on in their world. So if I'm dealing with an engineering firm, I'll I'll try and find some information about the regulations for health and safety that I can then link back to. I'll talk to them about potential incidents that have happened and where having the current version of their operating procedures has, saved a life, has meant that, they can go through and do the work that they need to do. So those tools can be really, really helpful as a starting point, not only to create something, but also to engage with your customer base, to be able to go and ask intelligent questions and get a really better, much better response back from them. And I have found over the last wee while that, again, that kind of process has really changed some of the conversations because people are busy. Everybody is trying to do more with less all the time, and being conscious of everybody's time pressures, it is really helpful to be able to say, okay, so I've done some research, I think I know this, but can I please leverage your experience to make this better? I think everybody usually does want to help with things like that. So again, use them as a starting point. Assume though that they're not definitive. Generative AI models pull from and learn from both good and bad data. Now, we've spoken about this quite a lot already. Okay, so the more poor quality data you've got in your system, the worse your outcomes are going to be. So, what you do need to be conscious of is what kind of data you've got. If you have, let's say, and I know quite a few customers have, quite a few customers will have old SharePoint environments or old file shares that they literally picked up and have just chucked into their new SharePoint Online environment with little or no curation and little or no cleanup. If I'm using then Copilot over that, I'm going to use all of that data. Some of it's outdated, some of it's downright wrong, and some of it has language in it that I would not want to be using at all. And again, I'll go to a classic example here. I used to work for an organization in the United Kingdom, and when the Data Protection Act was first enacted over there, it was only electronic files that were affected. So some of my rather, let's call them fun officers, used to write handwritten notes on recruitment files. And if some of those handwritten notes got out now, it would be an absolute disaster. So I took great delight in telling them that the Data Protection Act was changing and that all of those notes were also now accessible. So change of behavior, which is awesome. But if you've got some of that in your system where you've got some language that you don't want to have, again, on the front page of the paper, then let's have a clean up before we start allowing these models to dig into that data set. But ultimately, these tools do have a lot of use for us. As I say, they can give us some really good information. They can save us a heap of time when we're looking at research and trying to pin down details. And they can help us do our jobs better, give us those frameworks and those skeletons faster. They can build us an infographic about what information management, records management looks like. What are some of the components? Give me a reference model for an information management framework, and where that used to take us a long time and consultants would charge you a lot for that, and I have. Now you can get that information from ChatGPT and those other models as well. So huge value for us, but you just do need to be a little bit careful as well. So hopefully we've got a few questions, and hopefully we've got a little bit of time to answer them for you. I want to thank you guys also for your participation in Slido. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And as I say, I will update your slide deck with those. So let's have a look and see what questions we have. When we have Copilot included, okay, so Copilot is a closed model. So again, it exists within your environment. So your Microsoft 365 tenancy is your tenancy. So it basically will be closed to you guys. So it's not something that's going to go out into the world at large. It's very much looking at your content. Thank you, Daniel. Well, hopefully that was helpful for you. Thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon. It's been my absolute pleasure, and hopefully I'll get to see you again. Oh, thank you so much, team. That's lovely. I can talk about anything records management for days and days and days. So if anybody ever wants to chat on anything, find me on LinkedIn and we'll have a chat. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. Jennifer, I'll hand back to you to close out.
Yes, everyone, thank you again so much for joining us today. And thank you, RecordPoint, for bringing this content to us. It was a wonderful session. And like I mentioned, keep an eye on your inbox and we'll make sure we get access to today's recording and the presentation to you as soon as possible. And until next time, we hope everyone has a great rest of their week. And thanks for joining us today.